There's a reason women used to be required to cover their heads. And it's not what you think. Most people have no idea why it actually started, or why the Bible even talks about it. The truth has been hidden, twisted, and even erased over time. But today, we're uncovering the real reason women covered their heads in ancient times. And trust me, you won't see this coming. But real quick, if you love learning hidden truths like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button so more people can uncover what's been lost over time. And let me know in the comments, have you ever thought about the real reason behind head coverings before? Let's talk about it. All right, let's be real. Most of us have heard that head coverings were about modesty. But what if I told you that in ancient times, people had some straight-up wild beliefs about why women had to cover their hair? I'm talking about things like hair being a reproductive organ, a source of witchcraft, and even a symbol of high status. Yeah, let's get into it because some of this is going to blow your mind. 1. They thought hair was a reproductive organ. Ancient Greece and Rome. Okay, this one is going to sound crazy, but stay with me. Back in ancient Greece and Rome, some of the most well-respected thinkers, Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen, believed that women's hair played a role in reproduction. They thought a woman's hair wasn't just for looks. It actually helped draw in male reproductive fluids. Yes, really. And somehow played a part in conception. Because of this belief, women were expected to cover their hair, especially married women, so they wouldn't interfere with their fertility or attract the wrong kind of attention. The longer and fuller a woman's hair, the more fertile she was considered. And since fertility was everything in ancient times, head coverings were seen as a way to protect a woman's reproductive energy. It sounds ridiculous now, but this belief actually influenced Roman and Greek customs, where married women were expected to keep their heads covered in public. 2. Hair was seen as too seductive. If you've ever heard someone say women should cover their hair to avoid tempting men, this idea goes way back, all the way to early Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. In many ancient cultures, a woman's hair was considered one of the most seductive parts of her body. Think about it. Back then, women weren't walking around in tight dresses or crop tops, so hair became a symbol of beauty and attraction. In Orthodox Judaism, married women started covering their hair because uncovered hair was seen as too intimate, kind of like exposing a private part of your body. This is why some Jewish women still wear wigs, sheetles, or scarves today. Then there's Islam. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, head coverings, like the hijab, became a big part of modesty culture. But here's something most people don't realize. Women in the Arabian Peninsula were already covering their hair long before Islam. The religion just reinforced a tradition that was already common in many parts of the world. 3. Loose hair equals witchcraft. Now, this one is wild. In medieval Europe, if a woman walked around with loose, uncovered hair, people started whispering that she might be a witch. Why? Because hair was believed to hold magical power. In many European folk traditions, witches were depicted with long, untamed hair, and people thought that an uncovered head meant a woman had some uncontrolled supernatural energy. This is why in medieval times, nuns completely covered their hair. It was a way to separate themselves from worldly temptations. On the flip side, women accused of witchcraft were often described as having long, wild hair, because proper women were supposed to keep it hidden. 4. Covering your hair was a sign of social class. Here's something a lot of people don't know. Head coverings weren't always about religion. In ancient Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylon, veiling was actually about class. Only elite women were allowed to wear veils because it was a sign of wealth and status. In fact, if a slave woman or a prostitute tried to wear a veil, she could be punished or even executed because veiling was reserved for the wives and daughters of wealthy men. This tradition carried on into Persian, Islamic, and even some European societies, where covering your hair became a symbol of nobility. The idea was that a respectable woman should be veiled, while lower-class women had no right to modesty. 5. Head coverings were just practical. Let's be real. Some of these traditions probably started just because it made sense in certain climates. In North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, covering your head wasn't just about modesty. It was about protecting yourself from the scorching sun, sandstorms, and harsh desert winds. Nomadic tribes like the Berbers, Bedouins, and Tuaregs have been covering their heads for thousands of years, not for religious reasons, but for survival. Over time, these practical coverings took on religious and cultural meanings, influencing later traditions in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. All right, we just took a deep dive into the wild beliefs ancient cultures had about head coverings. But now, let's time travel back to the present. Do people still believe the same things? Or has everything changed? Well, the truth is, it depends on where you look. Some traditions have faded over time, while others are still deeply rooted in certain cultures and religions. Let's break it down. 1. Christianity. Almost gone, but still exists. Back in the day, Christian women regularly covered their heads during prayer, worship, and even in daily life. Today, the practice has almost disappeared, except in a few places. Catholic and Orthodox churches. Some Catholic women still wear veils, mantillas, during Mass, especially in Latin American and European countries. Orthodox Christian women, especially in Eastern Europe and Russia, still cover their heads in church as a sign of humility. Mennonites and Amish women. In conservative Christian groups, women always wear head coverings as part of their daily modesty. African churches and Caribbean traditions. Many women in African Pentecostal and Caribbean churches wear elaborate church hats or head wraps as a sign of respect during worship. Has it changed? For the most part, yes. In the early church, Paul's teachings in 1 Corinthians 11 made head coverings common among Christian women. But over time, most churches abandoned the practice, seeing it as a cultural tradition rather than a biblical command. 2. Islam. Still strong, but with more choice. Among Muslim women, head coverings remain one of the most recognizable religious symbols. But here's something a lot of people don't realize. Not all Muslim women wear hijabs. Hijab, the most well-known head covering worn by many Muslim women as a sign of modesty. Niqab covers the entire face except for the eyes, worn mostly in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and parts of North Africa. Chador and burqa, full-body coverings found in Iran and some conservative Islamic societies. Has it changed? The belief behind wearing the hijab is still the same. It's a symbol of modesty and religious identity. But today, there's a growing debate about whether it should be a personal choice or a religious obligation. Some Muslim women choose to remove it, especially in Western countries, while others wear it proudly as a sign of faith. 3. African and Caribbean cultures. Identity and tradition. African cultures identify with head wrap for religious reason. But other than that, head coverings in Africa and the Caribbean aren't just about religion. They're about culture, identity, and heritage. Gile and Duku, West Africa. In countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, women wear head wraps, Gele, Duku, as a symbol of elegance, tradition, and respect. Rastafarian women, Jamaica. Many Rastafarian women cover their hair because they believe a woman's hair carries spiritual energy and should be kept private. Has it changed? Not really. Head coverings in these cultures are still worn proudly. But now, they're seen as fashion statements too. What was once a traditional symbol of modesty has evolved into an expression of personal and cultural pride. 4. Judaism, still covering, but not like before. In Orthodox Judaism, head coverings are still a big deal, especially for married women, but instead of veils, many Jewish women today wear shittles, wigs. Some Jewish women cover their natural hair with wigs so they appear modest in public but can still look stylish. Tichels, scarves. Popular among more traditional groups, a tichel is a headscarf that Jewish women wrap around their heads. Hats and bandanas, a more modern and subtle way of covering up. Has it changed? Yes and no. In the past, all Jewish women covered their heads, but today, many choose not to, especially in more liberal Jewish communities. Some Jewish women believe the practice is outdated, while others still see it as a sign of modesty and respect in marriage. 5. Hinduism and Sikhism, modesty and spirituality. Head coverings aren't just a thing in Abrahamic religions, they exist in Hindu and Sikh traditions too. Hindu women and dupattas. In India, many Hindu women wear a dupatta, a long scarf, to cover their heads during religious ceremonies. This isn't about modesty, but spiritual reverence. Sikh men in turbans. Sikh men, and some women, wear turbans to protect their spiritual energy and show devotion to their faith. Has it changed? For the most part, no. In Hinduism and Sikhism, head coverings are still worn in places of worship and formal religious events, though many women no longer wear them daily like they did in the past. Now, if you are part of any of these cultures or religion, let us know in the comments below what I'm missing or what has actually changed. I'm not an expert in any one religion and beliefs, so it would be great to learn more. One thing I know for sure. Some beliefs have faded, like the idea that hair plays a role in reproduction. Others have evolved, like Jewish women wearing wigs instead of scarves. And some are just as strong as ever, like the hijab in Islam or the gele in African cultures. But here's the big question. What does the Bible actually say about head coverings? Was it just a cultural thing? Or is there a deeper spiritual meaning behind it? All right, we've explored what different cultures and religions believe about head coverings, both in the past and today. But now, let's cut through the noise and get to the real question. What does the Bible actually say? Is head covering just an outdated cultural practice? Or is there a deeper spiritual meaning behind it? Let's break it down. 1. The key Bible passage, 1 Corinthians 11. If you've ever heard a sermon or discussion about head coverings in Christianity, chances are it was based on 1 Corinthians 11:2-16. This is the most direct passage in the Bible about whether women should cover their heads. Let's look at some key verses. 1 Corinthians 11:5, chapter 6. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off, then she should cover her head. At first glance, this sounds like a strict rule, but let's take a closer look. 2. The cultural context. Why did Paul say this? Back in the time of Paul, head coverings weren't just about modesty. They were a social and spiritual statement. Respect and submission. In Greek and Roman culture, married women covered their heads as a sign of respect to their husbands. Going uncovered was considered rebellious or even shameful. Temple prostitution. In cities like Corinth, many women who worked in pagan temples as prostitutes shaved their heads or left them uncovered. A Christian woman who didn't cover her head could be mistaken for one of them. Spiritual authority. In biblical times, the head was seen as a symbol of authority. Covering the head showed recognition of God's order, not just in marriage, but in spiritual life. So when Paul wrote this passage, he wasn't just throwing out a random rule. He was addressing the cultural issues of Corinth at the time. 3. The spiritual meaning. Covering is about honor, not just fabric. One of the most misunderstood parts of this head covering debate is that it's not really about the physical covering itself. It's about honor and spiritual order. 1 Corinthians 11:3. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. This verse isn't about superiority. It's about divine order. Paul was explaining that God is the authority over Christ. Christ is the authority over man. Man is the authority over woman in marriage. So in this cultural context, a head covering symbolized that a woman respected the divine order. But here's where things get interesting. Paul also mentions hair in the same passage. 4. Is hair the real covering? 1 Corinthians 11:15. But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory, for her hair is given to her as a covering. Wait, so is Paul saying hair is the real covering? This is where the debate starts. Some Christians believe this verse replaces the need for a fabric head covering, while others believe both are required. Some say head coverings were just a cultural practice. Others say the spiritual symbolism still applies today. And some believe hair itself is the covering Paul was talking about. So what's the real answer? 5. Do Christian women need to cover their heads today? The truth is, the Bible never commands head coverings as a requirement for salvation. Nowhere in Scripture does it say, if you don't wear a head covering, you are sinning. Instead, it's more about understanding biblical authority. It's about respecting God's order, not just wearing fabric. Personal conviction. Some Christian women today choose to wear head coverings as a sign of devotion, while others see it as cultural and no longer necessary. Spiritual humility. Whether through covering or other acts of submission, honoring God should always be the goal. The bottom line. So, should Christian women cover their heads today? It depends on your understanding and conviction. If you believe it honors God, then wearing a head covering might be a meaningful act of worship. If you believe it was a cultural practice, then focusing on the spiritual meaning behind it is more important. At the end of the day, what matters most isn't the covering on your head. It's the posture of your heart. Head coverings in the Bible weren't just about modesty or submission. They were a symbol of divine order, respect, and spiritual identity. Some cultures still hold on to this belief, while others have let it go. But what remains the same? The importance of honoring God in how we present ourselves, whether through clothing, behavior, or the way we live out our faith. What do you think? Do head coverings still have a place in Christianity today? Drop your thoughts in the comments.